The sky over the Pacific Ocean was a tapestry of violet and orange, painting a portrait of a world on the verge of change. Jax West stood at the edge of the cliff, gazing down at the crashing waves, his mind swirling like the ocean below him. The wind tugged at his hair, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Today wasn't just any day, it was the day he'd been waiting for, the day he would finally confront the one man responsible for ruining his life, Governor Thorne Davran. He could still remember the day his mother, Isla Evander, had been arrested. The shock, the confusion, the anger. She'd been accused of a crime she did not commit, a crime fabricated by the very people who now controlled the government. The charge had been a false one, treason, an accusation of betraying her own people, but they'd manipulated the evidence, twisted her history, and silenced the truth. Jax clenched his fists at his sides, the memory of his mother's tear-streaked face still fresh in his mind. She had been taken from him without warning, without mercy. And in her place, a lie had been allowed to fester, growing larger with every passing year. But Jax had never given up. He'd spent every day of the last decade learning everything he could about the people who'd done this to his mother. He'd honed his mind, his body, and his connections. Now, he was closer than ever to the truth, and to avenging the woman who had given him everything. As he turned away from the cliff's edge, Jax's gaze fell on the woman standing a few feet behind him, a figure bathed in the soft light of the evening. Leary. Her presence was a constant in his life, though at times, it felt like she was more of a puzzle than a solution. She had come into his world through an unexpected encounter, her enigmatic background a mystery that seemed to hold more questions than answers. Leary had never spoken about her past, but Jax could sense there was more to her than what she let on. And yet, in a strange way, her quiet strength felt like the anchor he had needed in the storm of his life. "You're thinking too hard, Jax," Leary said softly, her voice cutting through his thoughts like a calm breeze. Jax turned to her, his lips curling into a faint smile. "How could you tell?" Leary's eyes sparkled in the dying light. "I've been around you long enough to know when you're planning something dangerous." He hesitated, his expression growing serious. "This isn't just dangerous. It's everything." She nodded, stepping closer, her gaze locking with his. "I know. But you're not alone in this." The words hung in the air, offering comfort and a challenge at the same time. Jax had always been a solitary figure, but something about Leary's presence made him feel less like an island. Even though they had their differences, her guardedness, his impulsiveness, they had forged an alliance out of necessity. But over the past few months, that alliance had shifted. Something deeper had begun to bloom between them. Jax took a step toward her, his heart racing in ways he couldn't entirely explain. He wasn't used to feeling this way, vulnerable, exposed, but Leary had a way of disarming him. Her calmness, her understanding, made him feel like he could be more than just the son of a woman wronged. He could be something different, someone with the power to change the course of his life. "You don't have to do this alone," she repeated, her voice a soothing whisper. "But you do need to trust me." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I want to trust you." Her hand brushed against his arm, sending a spark of warmth through him. "Then let me help you." There was a long pause as Jax searched her face, trying to read the layers hidden behind those deep eyes. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter now, laced with a mix of fear and determination. "This is about more than just revenge, Leary. It's about righting the wrongs. It's about making sure my mother's legacy isn't forgotten." Leary smiled softly, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Then let's make sure it's not." Jax and Leary spent the following hours preparing for the confrontation ahead. The plan was risky, very risky, but it was the only option they had. Jax knew that Governor Thorne Davran, the man who had masterminded Isla's downfall, was a man of ruthless ambition. His grip on power had remained unchallenged for years, but Jax had uncovered something Davran didn't expect, a secret buried deep in the governor's past. A secret that would tear his empire apart. It had taken months of careful research, a network of contacts in the shadows, and a few well-timed maneuvers to piece it all together. But now, Jax was ready to expose everything. Leary had been instrumental in this. She had connections of her own, people who had watched from the sidelines, waiting for the right moment to act. She had never told Jax everything about herself, but he didn't need to know all of her history to recognize that she was more than capable. And when it came to trusting someone, Leary had proven herself time and time again. As the night stretched on, the shadows in the room grew deeper. The faint hum of a computer monitor filled the silence. The plan was set. Tomorrow, everything would change. Jax paused as he gathered his gear, his eyes catching a photo on the desk, a faded picture of him as a child, smiling next to his mother, Isla. She had always been his protector, his guide, and the thought of her injustice haunted him every moment. But he had made a promise, to her, to himself, that he would see her legacy honored. He turned to Leary, who was standing near the door, her expression unreadable. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice steady but betraying a hint of the tension coursing through him. Leary met his gaze, her lips curving into a faint smile. "I've been ready for a long time." With a final glance at the photo, Jax nodded. The time for talk was over. It was time for action. They left the room together, walking into the night, each of them carrying the weight of their mission. They were no longer just two people fighting for justice, they were the beginning of something far bigger. The end of Davran's reign. As they approached the waiting transport, the soft glow of the city lights cast long shadows on the ground. Jax's heart beat faster now, not from fear, but from the realization that everything was about to change. There would be no turning back. He was on the cusp of something far greater than revenge, he was about to uncover a truth that would reshape everything. And in that moment, standing side by side with Leary, Jax felt the first stirrings of something else, something he hadn't expected. Hope. This part sets the stage for the confrontation between Jax and the corrupt forces that have controlled his life. It introduces a romantic dynamic between Jax and Leary, building tension and anticipation for the coming conflict. The emotional weight of Jax's mission is clear, and the bond between him and Leary promises to evolve as the story progresses. Let me know if you want further development or specific adjustments. The world felt different the morning after their quiet departure. The weight of the night's plans hung heavily in the air as Jax West and Leary moved swiftly through the city streets, their faces hidden beneath hoods, their movements purposeful. Every corner they turned brought them closer to the heart of the storm, the place where Jax's vengeance would meet the truth. The air was thick with anticipation, each breath a reminder of the battle ahead. The plan was simple in theory: infiltrate Governor Davran's private archives, retrieve the files that would expose the corruption, and then, if all went according to plan, broadcast the truth for the world to see. The stakes were high. Too high. But for Jax, there was no other choice. This was his mother's life they were playing with. And nothing, no matter the cost, was going to stop him from bringing justice to the woman who had been his world. As they reached the outskirts of the city, Jax's thoughts turned inward. There was a gnawing ache in his chest, a constant reminder of the loss he had suffered. His mother had been everything to him. Strong, determined, loving. Her unjust conviction had shattered not just her life, but his as well. She had always told him that love was the most powerful weapon in the world. But now, in the face of the political machine that had torn her down, Jax wondered if love could ever be enough to defeat the darkness that lurked within it. Jax, Leary's voice broke through his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. We're almost there. Stay focused. He glanced over at her, noticing the way the sunlight caught the edges of her features, illuminating the sharp angles of her jaw and the softness of her lips. It was a simple, fleeting thing, but in that moment, the tension between them shifted. Something unspoken hung in the air, a connection that neither of them had fully acknowledged yet. Leary had been his ally, his guide, but as they grew closer to Davran's fortress, it became harder to ignore the way his heart beat faster when she was near. You've been quiet, she continued, her eyes scanning the horizon. You've been quiet for days. Jax's lips twitched in a half-smile. Just thinking. Leary raised an eyebrow. About what? He hesitated. Could he admit what had been plaguing his thoughts? Could he confess that, for the first time, he wasn't just thinking about revenge? That part of him was afraid of losing control, of the man he might become when the truth was exposed. And part of him, just a small part, feared what might happen to the fragile connection he and Leary had started to build. But instead of answering her, he simply nodded. It's nothing. They arrived at a secluded area on the edge of the city, a network of tunnels beneath the old industrial district. Jax and Leary had scouted the location the night before, and now it was time to put their plan into action. The tunnels would lead them directly into the heart of Davran's private archive facility, the place where all the damning evidence was stored. Are you ready? Leary asked, her voice low. Jax looked into her eyes, feeling the weight of their unspoken bond, and then he nodded. Let's do this. The tunnels were dark, their air thick with the scent of damp earth and stale metal. Every footstep echoed in the silence, reminding Jax that every move they made carried the risk of detection. The heart of the city felt miles away now, the hum of life replaced by the quiet dread of what lay ahead. They reached the archive entrance after what felt like hours, navigating through narrow passages and hidden stairways. Jax's mind was sharp, his body on high alert. But despite the urgency of their mission, a part of him found himself distracted by the way Leary moved beside him. She was calm, efficient, but there was something else in her, an intensity that matched his own. He couldn't quite figure her out, but the bond between them was undeniable. Leary turned to him as they approached the security panel near the entrance to the archive room. I'll disable the alarm system, she said, her voice steady, her fingers already working over the panel. You keep watch. Jax nodded, his eyes scanning the dimly lit corridor. His heart raced with the knowledge that they were close, so close to the truth, so close to the end of the path he had walked for years. If he could just get the files, he could bring Davran down. He could make the world see the truth of what happened to his mother. As Leary worked, Jax couldn't help but notice the way her fingers danced over the control panel, her movements fluid and confident. He knew she had skills that went beyond what she had told him, and part of him wanted to ask her more. But now wasn't the time. Suddenly, the door to the archive slid open with a soft hiss. Leary stood back, a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. We're in. Jax's pulse quickened. He stepped inside, his eyes immediately drawn to the rows of files that lined the walls. The room was dimly lit, casting long shadows over the stacks of paperwork, digital terminals, and secure containers. But the truth was in here. Somewhere. He began to search the first stack, his hands moving quickly as he sifted through the records. His heart raced with the hope that this would be the moment that would end Davran's reign. But the deeper he searched, the more frustrated he became. There were no direct references to his mother, no clear evidence of the corruption he knew was hidden here. Anything? Leary asked, her voice a whisper as she joined him at the far end of the room. Jax shook his head, frustration mounting. Nothing yet. But we're getting closer. Leary didn't respond, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that made Jax pause. For a moment, the urgency of their mission faded. All he could think about was her, the way she had stood by him, the way she understood the pain in his heart without needing to hear the words. You've been through a lot, Leary said quietly, her voice softer than it had been moments before. And you've carried it all alone. Jax glanced over at her, caught off guard by the tenderness in her tone. I don't have much of a choice. Leary stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. You do now. Jax opened his mouth to reply, but before he could speak, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway outside. His heart leaped into his throat. Leary, we need to go, now. Leary's eyes widened in realization. She turned to him, her face unreadable, and nodded. Move. They quickly gathered what they could and retreated to the far corner of the room, ducking behind a stack of crates. Jax's heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder that they were running out of time. Seconds felt like hours as the footsteps grew louder, closer. A team of security guards rounded the corner, their weapons drawn, scanning the area for any sign of intruders. Jax's breath caught in his throat as he held his position, hoping that the shadows would hide them long enough. His thoughts raced. This was it, the moment everything would either fall apart or come together. There was no turning back now. But just as the guards drew near, Leary whispered, "Now." In one swift motion, she moved, pulling Jax into the narrow passageway behind the crates. They ran silently, their feet barely touching the ground as they maneuvered through the hidden hallways. Every step felt like it could be their last, but they couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close to the truth. They reached the exit just as the guards began to search the archives. Jax pushed open the hidden door, feeling the rush of cool night air hit his skin. They had made it. As they fled into the night, Jax couldn't help but glance at Leary. Her eyes were focused, her expression set, but there was something else, a quiet pride in her stance, a recognition that they had achieved something monumental. The mission wasn't over yet. But for the first time, Jax felt a sense of hope stirring in his chest. Leary turned to him, offering a brief smile. "We're not done yet, Jax." He nodded, feeling the weight of their next steps hanging over him. But for the first time in years, Jax wasn't afraid. He wasn't just fighting for his mother anymore. He was fighting for something bigger. This part introduces the first major action of the story as Jax and Leary infiltrate Davran's private archives, uncovering clues that will eventually lead to the downfall of the corrupt system. It also explores the growing tension and unspoken emotions between Jax and Leary, setting the stage for future revelations and romantic developments. Let me know if you'd like to refine or expand any particular parts. The night air was thick with tension as Jax and Leary made their way through the hidden alleyways of the city. The small transport they'd used to escape Davran's compound had long since vanished into the night, but the weight of what they had uncovered in the archive still pressed heavily on Jax's mind. The files they'd stolen had revealed disturbing truths, evidence of not just Isla's wrongful conviction, but the network of corruption that ran through every facet of the government. Davran wasn't just a figurehead, he was the puppet master, pulling the strings of the entire political system. Jax's fingers trembled as he clutched the encrypted data chip that contained the evidence they needed. But as important as the files were, it wasn't the evidence that haunted him now, it was the revelation that had come at the end of their mission. Leary had known more than she had let on. She had been connected to Davran in a way that Jax hadn't expected. She hadn't been just another ally, she had a personal history with the governor, a history she had kept buried beneath layers of silence and secrecy. It wasn't just her skill set that had drawn Jax to her, it was her knowledge, her past. Leary had lied to him. And now, standing in the cool shadows of the city, Jax could feel the sting of that betrayal. They had made their way back to the safe house they had set up, a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. But the silence between them had become unbearable. Jax set the data chip down on the table, his hands resting on either side as he stared at it. Leary stood in the doorway, watching him, but she didn't approach. "You knew, didn't you?" Jax's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid words. Leary didn't immediately respond. She stepped into the room, her presence filling the space between them. Her eyes were guarded, but Jax could see the guilt there, the hesitation. She had made a choice, and now they were both paying for it. "Jax, You knew," he interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "You knew Davran's ties to my mother, to everything. Why didn't you tell me?" She lowered her head, her fingers brushing the edge of the table. "I didn't tell you because it wasn't my story to tell." Jax's fists clenched, his frustration bubbling over. "It is your story now, Leary. You're part of this. And I've trusted you. But now it feels like you've been hiding pieces of the truth from me all along." The words hit harder than he expected, the anger in his chest threatening to consume him. He had never been one to trust easily, but with Leary, it had felt different. She had been his ally, his confidant. They had shared everything, except this. She took a deep breath, stepping closer, her eyes meeting his. "You're right. I should have told you sooner." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. "But I didn't want you to look at me like you're looking at me now." Jax shook his head, his mind racing with conflicting emotions. "How am I supposed to look at you now, Leary? After everything?" Leary's gaze softened, but there was a sadness in her eyes, a hint of something more than just guilt. "Jax, I never meant for you to find out this way. I thought I could protect you from it. But the truth is, I was part of Davran's operation. I was his. I was his informant, his insider." Jax's breath caught in his throat. "What? You were working for him?" Leary nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes. I wasn't always like this. I didn't have a choice. Davran, he has ways of making people do things. He found me when I was young, vulnerable. I had nothing. He offered me everything, security, safety, purpose. But the longer I worked for him, the more I saw the things he was doing, the lies, the manipulation. I couldn't stay loyal to him. But I couldn't leave either, not without risking everything." Jax stared at her, his anger fighting with the wave of betrayal that coursed through him. "You were feeding him information about my mother?" "No," Leary quickly corrected. "Not about your mother. Not specifically. But I knew what he was capable of. I knew the danger he posed. I tried to warn people, tried to protect the ones I could. But I couldn't do it alone. And now I'm paying the price." The weight of her words hung between them. Jax's mind was spinning. He had always thought of Leary as someone who had been through struggles, just like him. But this? This was different. She had been in the belly of the beast, and now, after everything, she was asking him to understand. "Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning?" Jax asked, his voice quieter now, a note of hurt beneath the anger. "You had a chance to warn me, to prepare me for what we were up against. And instead, you kept it all hidden." Leary's face twisted with pain. "Because I thought you wouldn't forgive me. And because I didn't want you to hate me. I didn't want you to see me as just another part of the machine that's been hurting you. I thought if I kept my distance, kept my secrets, it would keep you safe." Jax felt the wind knocked out of him. Her words stung in ways he hadn't expected. She had kept her distance for his safety. She had hidden everything to protect him. The thought made his chest tighten. All this time, he had believed Leary was on the same mission as him, had believed she was driven by the same pain, the same fire for justice. But now it seemed that everything had been a lie, or at least, a half-truth. "You are part of this, Leary," Jax said, his voice raw. "I can't just forget that. You've been in this as much as I have. Maybe even more. You've made your choices, and I've made mine. But we can't change the past." Leary took a step closer, her eyes desperate. "Jax, I know I've made mistakes. But I'm not the person I was when Davran found me. I've been fighting him for years, trying to undo the damage I did. I can't undo the past, but I can fight with you. I want to help you take him down. Please, don't shut me out now." Jax stared at her, the emotions swirling in his chest. Betrayal, anger, hurt, yes. But also something else. Something he had been trying to ignore since the moment they had met, trust. Somewhere beneath the surface, he still wanted to believe in her. He met her eyes, the anger beginning to fade into something more complicated. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this, Leary. But right now, I need your help. This isn't about you or me anymore. It's about Davran. It's about my mother." Leary nodded, her gaze softening. "And I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." The next few days were a whirlwind of planning, tension, and more secrets being uncovered. The data they had retrieved from Davran's archives was just the beginning. They needed to dig deeper, to expose the full extent of his corruption. But with every step closer to the truth, the danger grew. Jax and Leary became a united front once again, though the emotional chasm between them had widened. There were moments when their proximity felt electric, a quiet tension that neither could ignore. And yet, there were also times when the silence between them was thick with unresolved feelings, a reminder that trust, once broken, wasn't easily repaired. But as they prepared for the final confrontation, Jax realized that forgiveness wasn't a luxury he could afford. He couldn't afford to hold on to his anger, not if it meant losing sight of the bigger picture. It was time to make Davran pay for the crimes he had committed, not just against Isla, but against every person whose life had been shattered by his lies. They weren't fighting just for justice anymore. They were fighting for the future. This part delves into the deep emotional conflict between Jax and Leary, with the tension of betrayal weighing heavily on their relationship. The stakes are raised as they continue their mission to expose Governor Davran, but now with the added complexity of their fractured trust. Let me know if you'd like further adjustments or additions to this part. The days following their heated confrontation felt like a strange dream, a blur of moments that passed too quickly and not quickly enough. Jax West couldn't help but feel the weight of everything hanging over him as he and Leary continued to work toward their goal. They had gathered the evidence they needed, infiltrated Davran's archives, and even exposed some of the governor's deepest secrets. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. They had uncovered the true extent of Davran's manipulation, the web of lies he had woven over the years. His involvement in Isla's wrongful conviction was just the tip of the iceberg. He had used his power to control people, manipulate governments, and destroy lives. Everything was on the table now. It wasn't just about justice for Isla anymore. It was about taking down the man who had poisoned the very system that Jax had spent his entire life fighting against. The truth was a dangerous thing. Jax's gaze drifted over the city's skyline as he stood on the rooftop of their safe house, his arms folded across his chest. The lights of the city flickered in the distance, but to Jax, they felt like the flickering of his own hope. Every step forward felt like he was being pulled into a deeper abyss. The truth had a way of changing everything, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for the consequences of it. Leary stepped up beside him, her presence comforting and unsettling all at once. She had been with him through everything, the archives, the escape, the close calls, but now, there was something different between them. The betrayal, the secrets, the lies, it had all come to a head. And no matter how much they had fought side by side, there were still things left unsaid. "Jax," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of the words they hadn't spoken in days. "Are you ready for what comes next?" He turned his head toward her, locking eyes. "I don't think I'll ever be ready for this." She nodded, her eyes dark with understanding. "But you're still going to do it. You're still going to bring him down." Jax didn't need to answer. The fire in his heart was all the confirmation she needed. There was no turning back now. He had made a promise to his mother, to himself, and now, he was going to see it through. But the closer they got to the final confrontation, the more he realized how little he truly knew about the man he was becoming. He wasn't just a son seeking revenge. He was a person on the brink of something much bigger. And with that came its own brand of fear. "Where do we start?" Leary asked, her voice steady, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her gaze. She knew what was coming too. They both did. Jax pushed himself off the ledge, his face hardening with resolve. "We get to Davran's estate. We find the last of the evidence. The public needs to know the truth, no matter what happens to us." Leary stepped back, her brow furrowed. "And after that? We expose him to the world." He didn't answer immediately. The plan had always been to expose Davran for the monster he was, but now, it felt like there was more at stake. What if the truth could destroy more than just Davran's life? What if it shattered everything they'd ever known? The silence between them stretched long before he spoke again. I think it's time we stopped running from the past. We face everything, together. Leary's eyes softened, the fierce wall she had kept up slipping for just a moment. I can't promise you what happens after. But I can promise that I'll stand by you until the end. Jax nodded, a slow smile tugging at his lips, though it felt hollow. Let's end this. The night was cold as they made their way toward Governor Davran's estate, the final battleground in their war for justice. The city was quieter than usual, the hum of traffic and life reduced to a low murmur as they moved through the shadows. The estate was located on the outskirts, far from the prying eyes of the public. Surrounded by high walls and guarded by armed security, it was the perfect place for Davran to hide his darkest secrets. They approached the estate through a back alley, Leary's sharp eyes scanning the perimeter, her movements quiet and fluid. Jax followed close behind, his mind racing with thoughts of what awaited them inside. They were so close, too close. The information they had gathered would expose everything. But would it be enough to bring Davran down? Or had they just walked into a trap? Leary paused at a large metal gate, pressing her ear against the cold iron. We'll need to disable the security system first. It's too risky to go in blind. Jax nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. They had done this a dozen times before, breaking into high-security locations, bypassing layers of protection. But this time, it felt different. They weren't just infiltrating a building. They were about to change everything. Leary worked quickly, her fingers moving with practiced ease as she disabled the gate's electronic lock. Within moments, it creaked open, revealing the dark grounds beyond. They slipped through the gate and into the estate's garden, moving like shadows beneath the trees. They made their way toward the main house, avoiding the main entrances and sticking to the shadows. Jax couldn't help but feel the tension in the air, the feeling that something was waiting for them, just beyond the edge of the light. You sure this is the right way? Jax whispered, his voice barely audible. Leary nodded, her eyes scanning the building ahead. I'm sure. The records room is on the top floor. We'll need to be quick. They reached the side entrance, a small door leading to the service hall of the estate. Leary quickly disabled the security system once more, and they slipped inside. The interior of the estate was grand and imposing, the walls lined with expensive art and tapestries, the floors polished marble. But Jax barely noticed any of it. His focus was solely on their mission: find the records, expose the truth, and get out. They moved swiftly through the hallways, their steps silent as they navigated the maze of corridors. But as they approached the stairs that would lead them to the top floor, something caught Jax's eye, a figure standing at the end of the hallway, waiting. He stopped in his tracks, his heart hammering. It was Davran's personal assistant, a woman who had always been too close to the action for comfort. She stood in the shadows, her eyes fixed on him, a cold smile curling on her lips. You didn't think it would be this easy, did you? She said, her voice like ice. Jax felt his blood run cold. You're with him. The woman laughed softly, taking a step closer. I've been with Davran for longer than you can imagine. And you're right, you won't be walking out of here with your prize. Jax's hand instinctively moved to his side, where his weapon was holstered. But Leary was already one step ahead. In a flash, she stepped in front of him, her eyes flashing with cold determination. Move aside, Jax, she said softly. Jax didn't understand at first, but then Leary reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device. With a flick of her wrist, she activated it, and a wave of electricity surged through the building. The lights flickered and then went out, plunging them into darkness. The assistant gasped in surprise, but it was too late. Leary moved with lightning speed, grabbing the woman by the wrist and twisting it behind her back. You're not going to stop us, Leary said, her voice low and dangerous. Jax's mind raced as the woman struggled. What are you doing? He asked, his confusion written all over his face. Leary looked over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. "I'm making sure we leave with the truth." They reached the top floor without further incident, and in the silence of the records room, Jax felt the weight of the moment settle around him. The files they had been searching for lay before them, thick, bound records, each one a piece of the puzzle. But as Jax sifted through them, something inside him shifted. He had been fighting for this moment for so long, but now that he had it, he didn't feel the relief he had expected. Instead, there was an emptiness, a hollow sense that even exposing the truth wouldn't be enough to heal the wounds that had been created. Leary stepped up beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "We have what we came for, Jax. The world will know what Davran did." But Jax couldn't shake the feeling that their battle was only just beginning. The truth was a powerful thing, but it could also destroy everything in its path. As they gathered the files, Jax made a decision. He wasn't going to run from this fight anymore, not from the truth, and not from Leary. "Let's do it," he said, his voice steady. Leary nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. "Let's end this." Layers of protection. But this time, it felt different. They weren't